All right, thanks everyone for joining us today. Today we're going to answer a very basic question. Are we even in the right regulatory framework? I know it sounds simple, but the answer is wrong. We can cause a ton of pain in the formulation process, the claims, the labels, and the launch plan. And we're here to try and avoid all that rework. So today we're going to use the Health Canada Sports Electrolyte decision as a practical case study. Health Canada is transitioning sports electrolyte products from the natural health product framework into the food framework, but that is only the first decision. The second decision will be whether the food falls under the conventional food category or the supplemented food framework. So that decision will depend on the complete product assessment, the format, the formula, the conditions of use, and how the product is represented. So today's not just about electrolytes. This is the classification method that, as a brand, you can use before you commit to any formulation claims, artwork, and commercialization. So when we have these conversations with brands, they're not exactly asking for a tour of food and drug regulations. So the practical questions, am I affected? Which framework applies? Can I keep my formula? Can I keep my claims? What has to change on the Canadian label? And what happens to the NPN that I already hold? So that's going to be the shape of today's session. We're going to start with the scope, the classification, the ingredients, the supplemented food status. After that, we'll cover claims, labeling, and the transition plan. So one point matters from the start. New products do not get the existing license holder transition runway. If you're a new product entering the Canadian market, you now have to meet the applicable food requirements at launch. The December 2027 transition target is for affected products that are already holding an NPN. For those that have not met, my name is Nickan Sadghian. I'm a regulatory solution specialist at Quality Smart Solutions. I help with essentially all the NPN-related issues as well as food-related questions, whether it's from product, the formulation assessment. I consider myself multilingual, and by that I mean whether you're in the commercialization team, you're in the operations team, the product development team, the research team. I like to think that we're multilingual here at QSS in that sense, and definitely. Regardless of your department, I'm sure we could have some great conversations about your products. I started out in pharmaceutical regulatory affairs as my postgraduate and then moved into natural health products, worked with startups, worked with global brands, and I'm excited to discuss this topic with all of you. So a little bit about Quality Smart Solutions before we get into the electrolytes decision. A quick word is QSS supports regulated product companies across NHPs, foods, supplemented foods, cosmetics, over-the-counter products, medical devices, veterinary products, and other Health Canada and FDA-related categories. We also offer global regulatory compliance, and that matters because this transition does not stop at classification. One pathway decision can trigger a formula review, supplemental ingredient screening, claim assessment, label conversion, translation, and communication with Health Canada. This is typically across multiple teams, and we're here to help keep those all connected through the process. So we'll start with the decision itself as we jump right in. So what changed is which products are effective and where does the boundary sit. So once the boundary is clear, everything downstream will get a lot easier. You stop asking whether every product containing electrolytes is the same category, and we can ask a better question: what is the particular product trying to be in the Canadian market? So in plain language, the announcement is that sports electrolyte products are transitioning from the NHP framework into the food framework. The oral rehydration solutions exception remains outside that transition. Existing sports electrolyte NPN holders are encouraged to transition by December 31st, 2027. And the commercial reading of all this is there's not going to be one answer for your entire portfolio. If you have 8 electrolyte SKUs, or NPNs, we may need to be, it will need to be a case-by-case basis where we review each formulation. One may carry an illness-related rehydration language, in which case you would be an ORS and remain an NPN. If you're adding vitamins, potassium, taurine, amino acids, or caffeine, we would need to do a detailed supplemented food screening for that product. Each SKU is going to have its own pathway decision. So the first deliverable is not going to be your design and artwork. It's going to be an evidence-focused classification and transition decision for every effective product. And this will avoid a ton of rework when you're working with your design team. I know the design is really important, but it will help streamline that process a ton if we move the regulatory screening to the front for your Canadian launch. So when you discuss electrolytes with your team, typically it goes right into the ingredient list. That's one step too early. So we start with the product, the way the consumer actually experiences it. This could be a ready-to-drink beverage, a concentrate, a powder that becomes a beverage, or an effervescent tablet dropped into water. Any format of product that the consumer is ultimately going to drink as a beverage is going to fall into this category. So an effervescent tablet might look like a supplement, but when it's sitting in the tube, but when it's intended to be mixed with water for hydration, the prepared beverage starts to require some more specific screenings. So Health Canada still considers the product as a whole. So it's not just going to be the format, it's going to be its representation, its composition, and how consumers understand and use it. So a swallowed capsule would not fall into this category. It's a bit different and will not fall into this framework. A capsule containing electrolytes is going to be outside the beverage-focused transition and will need its own assessment. So then we would layer on representation, and this is where it's really important, is the hydration, the rehydration, the electrolyte replacement, sports or exercise performance, whether it has exercise instructions around it, is going to determine which framework to follow. So that's why the electrolyte content alone is not the test that we would start with. So this is kind of the boundary slide where we would differentiate them. So there's two different stories that the product can tell. One story is sports hydration. If the product is used around rehydration, electrolyte replacement, or performance, that takes us into the food assessment. The other story would be the oral rehydration solutions. So if there's a therapeutic benefit around any sort of rehydration due to dehydration caused by diarrhea or vomiting, that stays in the NHP lane. The messy situation is a product that tries to tell both stories at once. As we like to tell our clients, any sort of marketing material is going to be regulated in the same format as a label. So consider all your marketing materials as an extension of your label. So we can't have a sports hydration marketing story on the label and on the website, and then have the oral rehydration solution story on other marketing materials. This new decision is going to cause products to pick a lane and pick a category, and that's going to help determine the final product positioning and determine if we're going to stick to the NHP route or the supplemented food or food route. So the way I would work through this conversation on a client call is this product. If a US company comes to me and with a hydration powder and it contains sodium, potassium, taurine, flavoring, and sweetener, it's marketed for use before or after training. The first question is whether taurine is allowed, typically, is what they ask me, but that's not where we would start. Again, we would start with how it's being represented. So if it's for treating dehydration caused by an illness like diarrhea or vomiting, then no, this would not be a supplemented food or a conventional food route. So it would be following the ORS pathway. Second, is it a ready-to-drink or water mix product representation for rehydration, sports hydration, or electrolyte replacement for performance? In that case, we would be able to move forward to the food framework. Only now do the ingredient questions become useful. The potassium would be on the supplemented ingredient list. Taurine is on the list. Sodium is really central to most electrolyte stories, but it's not on the list as a supplemental ingredient. So the sodium alone would not trigger us to fall into the supplemented food framework. So the added supplemental ingredients are what would trigger the next screening. and this would typically require a review sequence of the dose, the sources of the ingredients and their dosages. So the framework will tell us what ingredient rules apply, but brands will often run this backwards, where they think that the ingredient is going to choose the framework from the start, but it's the whole story that we would have to look at. So Health Canada's food and NHP interface analysis looks at the complete product. So there's 4 factors that would be considered together. Is what I mean by the whole story is the format. We would need to see if the representation on the labeled images, directions, how much of those, if the whole story is being relayed as sports and rehydration, or if it's following more of a therapeutic dose. If you have brand name ingredients and you're currently holding a class 3 NPN with the rehydration story, if your product is using unique claims, you will have to remain in the NPN side. But again, it's really important to work backwards from the story that you're trying to tell, and determining which ingredients you would need to reformulate to fall under the correct categories. So the composition would be really important. So the ingredients, the amounts, their purpose, and the intended conditions of use. This is why 2 products with similar mineral profiles can land in different places. One product can be positioned as an electrolyte hydration training for training, and then the other has the therapeutic use. So the different product stories will cause for different categories, and your commercial channel will also help determine this as well. Compliant label, as I've mentioned earlier, is not going to rescue you from your website telling another story. So now that the classification logic is clear, we can move into more operational questions. So what changes once the pathway changes? Different frameworks change the paperwork, the flexibility, and the risk in different places. As you may know, is for food labels. This is not just going to be a label design change, but it's going to be a full classification change for most brands. So once the pathway is set, the model would change. So an NHP is anchored through a product license application. There's a class 1 or class, we would determine if it's class 1, 2, or 3, and any meaningful change would have to be submitted via an amendment to NNHPD. This new decision will really push us towards the more conventional food and supplemented food, where your PCP would have to have all the controls in place, and you would have a little bit more freedom in terms of your sourcing, and your changes would be more internally controlled. So this would also be determined by your claims, your cautions, and your label architecture would definitely be one of the core changes that would be made. An electrolyte powder can definitely launch with caffeine, but then if you remove the caffeine, you might have a ton more of upper limit allowances for your other ingredients. So there's a ton of limitations that can be caused by combinations of ingredients, but there's also a lot of freedom that is going to come from this, and we're going to get into more details of those as well. So it's really important to make sure that your sources are also correct. Does the source of your ingredient fall under the conventional food or supplemental food approved sources, or would this require reformulation? And another important thing to keep in mind is when we are moving into the conventional food or supplemental food route, you would need to develop a nutrition facts table or a supplemented food facts table, and also screen for your FOP symbol and your cautions and your supplemented food caution as well. So all these things would require your nutritional data, which you may not have needed a full panel for your NHP. So these are all things to keep in mind for your commercialization. Classifying the food will get us through the first gate, but there is a second gate. Does it actually qualify as a supplemented food? So for this webinar, we're going to stick to the key categories. So it's water-based beverages, including the ready-to-drinks, the concentrates, the mixes, that are reconstituted into a drink. And then we would look at it from an ingredient level. So is the ingredients permitted? Is the exact form covered? Is it allowed in this category? What is the maximum per serving? Does the amount trigger cautions? Are there extra conditions tied to caffeine, age group, category, or representation? And this is where brands will ask if the dose fits in the NHP monograph. Can they use it? Can the same dose be used in supplemented food? That is not the case. So it's really important that we review the formulation and adjust where we need to fall into the right class. So a monograph can support the NHP licensing route, but it does not authorize that dose in a food. Some very interesting decisions that I've seen so far is that, like for example, the vitamin D, you're allowed up to 38 micrograms per serving in the supplemented food framework, which is about 1,520 IUs. But then when you add, with cautionary statements at 7 micrograms, but then when you add your caffeine, you start having some other issues with being limited to 7 micrograms as well. So you wouldn't be able to really reach that higher dose. And what's really interesting about that is in Canada, I'm sure many of you have had the conversations around the vitamin D limits. And what I found very interesting was the vitamin D limit for supplemented foods is actually higher than the limit that we could do in our combination formulations for NHP. So that's like a silver lining in all of this, as well as a lot of the flexibilities that definitely need to be discussed for products. So comparing the 4 practical products. So first would be the ready-to-drink beverages. If it's for sports hydration, it's moving into foods. Sodium is the headline, but sodium doesn't trigger the supplemented food status. As soon as you add things like potassium, vitamins, taurine, amino acids, caffeine, we would need to do a supplemented food screening. Second would be the effervescent tablets. So the word tablet does not really settle this classification. If the consumer dissolves it in water and it's represented as a hydration beverage, then that would really be the central part. And the preparation of the beverage would be the central part of this analysis. Third would be the ORS exceptions. So we've already mentioned this, but if you are following the illness-related dehydration treatment, you would need to stay in the NHP lane. And again, this is where having similar formulations but different classifications comes into play here. So it's not an ingredient-focused framework change here. So fourth would be the hydration powder with added nutrients or functional ingredients. This is where expensive assumptions will happen. So a brand finds one ingredient on the list and assumes the whole formula is cleared. That's not how it works. So potassium may be listed, taurine may be listed, certain amino acids may be listed, vitamin D may be listed, but then they will all have their own conditions, and in combination, they can limit each other. And that's where having the conversations early on in your commercialization stage really matters. There's a ton of questions about a lot of NHP ingredients, but again, there used to be some flexibility when supplemented foods was first introduced, but now it's set on an ingredient list that is slowly growing, but it's definitely in its early stages. But a lot of flexibility is there if you're for electrolyte products at this stage, and on a food basis, you will likely need to see these limits and discuss if you need to do reformulation. So the classification and with the formula is really important, but again, it's the whole story. Your branded ingredients will not create a unique pathway if you're following the food route, or it would still be assessed on the underlying substance in your brand name ingredients. So it's really important to check the composition statements of all these ingredients. If you have anything proprietary, we would need to review all the components and ensure that this can still proceed as in the new framework. So what changes once the product moves into a food? Moving the product from NHP to food does not move the licensed NHP claims with it. So we would have to rebuild the claims based on what the formulation would satisfy in terms of the food regulated pathway, nutrient content claims. And we would also need to discuss how you would position the electrolyte replacement claim. So that would still need to be assessed, and determining which path forward based on your category that your brand is in will definitely determine the path as well. And the food claims would need to stand on their own, and that would mean meeting the dosage requirements, and that's something we can help with. But again, in the supplemented food side, this can trigger lots of your formulation needs to be careful because of all the conditions of use and the caution statements that would come with it, as well as the FOP screening that we would do. So again, like when it comes to your product positioning, the caffeine is really a story that is important. Is you can't really focus on performance and any sort of wellness claims. As soon as you meet the caffeine trigger for non-carbonated electrolyte drinks, you will be limited on those, and it would likely fall out of the sports electrolyte positioning. So it's really important. It's a lot of moving parts that we would really help tie together in our screening conversations. So the hydration story is, if it's important to you, the caffeine might need to be reformulated to meet the correct dose. So moving forward to the food and label rebuild. So when an NHP moves to foods, it's not just the panel swap, it's the full label. For a conventional food, the work may include the nutrient facts table and ingredient list, the allergen declarations, the common name, the net quantities, the mandatory bilingual information, responsible party information, and front of package nutrition symbol assessment where triggered. So a lot of these elements are not on your NHP labels. So it's really important that all the requirements are met, especially if you're bringing products into Canada. For a supplemented food, normally requires a supplemented food facts table rather than the nutrition facts table. This would include having the supplemented with category below the typical nutrient profiles of a nutrition facts table, and the caution identifiers would need to appear where they're required to appear. And the supplemented food can require both the supplemented food caution and the front of package nutrition caution. There's also a timing issue. So again, for your timelines, you would need to also explore how you would substantiate the nutritional values, because if you're coming from the NHP pathway, you may not have all those immediately. So that's one thing that you will want to definitely keep in mind. So the transition of each affected product, this is again for existing NPNs. So the transition plan has to be product specific. It can't just be the entire portfolio. So although like there might only be one ingredient difference or the positioning is slightly changed, you would definitely need to go on an NPN by NPN basis or by a formula by formula basis. And again, if you're going for the rehydration due to illness route, that stays in NPN. If we're staying as a food or a conventional or supplemented food, that would definitely need to, again, dial in the channel that we're going into. And then the gap assessment of which ingredients would need review would follow. So which claims have to change? Does the label need a supplemented food facts table? Are cautions triggered? We would assess all the claims that we could get with your formula, and where we can adjust to meet the story that you're trying to portray. Even as a supplemented food, there's a lot of strong claims. And again, the deadline for existing licenses is December 31st, 2027. So 5 decisions to make before I show how we would help is I want to leave you with 5 decisions. First, is the product actually in scope? Second, is the product telling a sports hydration story or the ORS story? Third, if it's a food, is it a conventional food or a supplemented food? Fourth, which parts of the formula, claims, and label have to change? Fifth, what is the transition plan and timing? And underneath all 5, it would be, again, the story of don't start with one ingredient to determine your classification, but it would need to be the entire product as a whole. What is it? How is it consumed? How is it represented? Which framework follows the complete picture? And then we would follow by doing a formula level review and assessing each ingredient and every claim under that framework, and that this would avoid a ton of rework if we start with front loading the regulatory screening. So I'll finish up with just how we can help as QSS and how we support brands with this transition. I'm sure it's clear by now that knowing the transition exists is the easy part, but knowing what to do with each SKU is where the work begins. So QSS, we work across NHPs, conventional foods, supplemented foods. For this transition, the work almost always starts with the classification. From there, it moves into formula and supplemental ingredient screening, NPN strategies, claims assessment, label conversions, French translation, and transition planning. The most useful early deliverable is often a short discussion and early screening for each SKU. And this is where we can discuss if it's in scope, would it be a food or an NHP? If it's a food, is it a conventional or supplemented that we would help with? Which ingredients and claims are the pressure points, and what has to change before launch or transition? Before commercializing the products, again, we would work with any of your marketing claims, the regulatory concerns, quality concerns as well. We can do the gap analysis for, and it would all kind of be boiled into one discussion across all your departments that we would help kind of streamline that story for you. So that's it for the session. Thank you so much for your time. If you have an effective product, the quickest next step is a short classification and transition discussion. You can scan the QR code or contact QSS after the session. I'm happy to take any questions now. Sorry to not mention this earlier, but please go ahead and add any of your questions in the comments, and I'm happy to answer them. Whether it's your ingredient form, amounts per serving, full formula, we're happy to help with any of those, your website language, and just a helping screen for NHP versus food frameworks. We're here to get you to the right answer. There's no question too crazy. So do naturally occurring amounts? Yes. So if you have naturally, so this is why the nutritional panel is extremely important. Your naturally occurring amounts will also count towards the supplemented with quantity. So the amounts on the label must be truthful and not misleading. So there must be the whole story on there when we're displaying any sort of nutrient content claims or supplemented with claims. The natural occurring amounts absolutely must also be disclosed. Can we use the same US label for the Canadian product? So this is a very, very, very good question and a very common question. However, we definitely cannot we definitely cannot do the US labels and pass them as Canadian labels. We've tried for many clients in the past, and there's due to a lot of limitations. It's not possible to create a non-misleading label that is going to pass for both Canada and the US. Hopefully in the future that will change, but as of now, that's not the case. So for supplemented foods, is it required to do stability for the claims of the supplemented ingredients? Absolutely. So at the end, so the way it would be determined is at the end of shelf life, your your claim must be met. So we do offer gap analysis in terms of QA, and we can review the stability and ensure that all of these are met. But at the end of it must be until the end of shelf life that your label claim is defendable. So if the product has both NHP ingredients and supplemented food ingredients, but the format is like energy drink with health claims, what should be the pathway? Yeah, so that's a great question. So if the product has NHP ingredients as well as supplemented food ingredients, this would still keep it as a natural health product. So this would require a product license application. It would need to be solely in the food category. It's either an NHP or a food, and then after that, it would be, is it a food or can this be a supplemented food with the associated claims and benefits? So if the product does have NHP ingredients, it would remain as an NHP, and it would require a class 1, 2, or 3 product license application. So we have naturally derived seawater trace mineral brine that has excellent electrolyte properties, small dose in water. Where is it likely to fit within the framework? Okay, so that's a great question. So the trace mineral brine would be considered a naturally occurring amount due to it not be, if it has the supplemented minerals as well, this would have to be displayed on the supplemented panel. But if it's only the trace mineral brine and it's coming from the seawater, this can still be positioned as naturally occurring minerals. That's a great question. We definitely would like to look at the composition and sources that are part of that to determine that if it's still able to be classified as a food. Yeah, so in that case, that's a really interesting one. It would still be able to be a food if we could display only minerals that are permitted on a nutrition facts table. So that one has a little bit of nuance that we can help build and decide which story is better for that ingredient. So that can definitely be a food, and it can also we can also determine based on the sources if this can be a supplemented with story as well. If the amounts of the ingredients are triggering nutrient content claims or nutrient function claims or supplemented ingredient claims, we would definitely have to explore both those options and see which story would be better for your product positioning. Right. Well, please don't be shy. I'll leave a couple more minutes for questions. If you don't want to ask the questions now, please feel free to scan the QR code or reach out to us by email or phone, and we'd be happy to jump on a individual consultation. Yeah, so there's a lot of for those who joined late, the main difference between the sports drink and the NHP was that there's a supplemented food ingredients list that is now permitted, and what is going to happen to all those formulas that are falling under the food ingredient or the supplemented food ingredient list will now be phased into being regulated as foods or supplemented foods. So we would have to explore not just changing the label, but also at a claims level and at a formula level, you would need to reassess the positioning and ensure that all your non-medicinal ingredients, which would now just be ingredients and sweeteners and all those other excipients, would now need to fall into approved food ingredients, and that's what we'd be happy to help with. Uh, but yeah, so this is essentially because a lot of people are consuming electrolyte drinks as if they're foods and this is with the sole purpose of replenishing electrolytes for sports electrolyte recovery. So that's if that's the product positioning and the ingredients fall under the permitted list, then we can move away from the NHP path and keep this as a food, which would allow for a lot of flexibility. And for those of you who are not currently holding an NPN, you'd be able to potentially launch a lot faster because you wouldn't need to wait for a licensing decision from an NHPD. I hope that was a good like polls notes for that. Right. Well, I'll give it one more minute for questions. I'm just in case anyone else joined late. I'm happy to answer any questions, whether it's now or if you'd like to reach out to us. We're super excited about a lot of the flexibilities that this is providing, and we'd be happy to discuss this further. Yeah, so your facility would have to have an SFCR license, so they would need to have a preventative control plan. It's it's almost like a self-monitoring plan that would really align similarly to how NHP facilities are being audited. So if they're an NHP facility, it won't be too difficult, and we also help with setting those up as well. But it would be an SFCR path and not an NHPD path. Right. Well, I hope I was able to help clarify the framework for everyone today, and thanks so much for joining us. And please don't hesitate if you have any questions for us. This was a lot of fun to put together, and I look forward to discussing this further with um, with hopefully all of you. Thanks so much for joining, guys. Take care.